that commercial banks require in order to transact their business. But because if you look at what is required in the banking business, you go to a local bank here in Trinidad and Tobago and you do a transaction, whether it's a trade transaction or sending some money to your family abroad or even cashing a check. If there is not a bank in a foreign country where the money was generated, or who will receive it and complete the transaction for you so that the person that you're paying can be paid, if there is not that relationship, what is called correspondent banking, between local banks and the equivalent partners abroad, then transactions that you do here will be stalled because those transactions will not be accepted by banks outside of Trinidad and Tobago to complete the objective, which is to pay someone, pay for an import, or to transfer money about. So, in short, it is necessary for local banks to have correspondent foreign banks to be able to carry out those transactions as their normal scale of business. If it is that those foreign banks are not available to you to give you the service that you need, then these transactions become a problem. And within CARICOM, action had begun to be taken against a number of banks in countries that were deemed not to be compliant and therefore could not participate in the banking business. So this problem attracted the attention of CARICOM, and we spent many hours working on it over the years. All during the pandemic it has been there, but we decided to lobby those who were making those decisions against us. I could tell you that one CARICOM country had reached a point where all but one of the banks were able to conduct foreign transactions. On this occasion, as we met in Barbados, it was against the background that a small CARICOM country, which is not even independent, which has the cover of a larger economy in Europe, that country had suddenly found that its banking business had virtually been cut off from all international banking. And of course, we would have seen on many occasions reference to Trinidad and Tobago and others, but Trinidad and Tobago in particular, as warranting adjustments to our business because we are in fact engaged in deleterious offshore banking, which of course we are not. Trinidad and Tobago is not any offshore banking center, and we do not engage in any offshore banking of any significant nature as far as I know. What we engage in is normal retail banking and international commercial banking. And I want you to make a distinction between normal banking within a country requiring external support from external banking partners and offshore banking. Offshore banking is when you provide within your country the ability to register companies, which some say are paper companies, and those companies do transactions for people largely outside of your country, and you facilitate that commercial transaction in a bank that is in a book but may not even be conducting any business within the country. We are not engaged in that. However, because they do not talk to us in the way that they should, prior to determining what we are engaged in or what we are guilty of, we have been finding ourselves as CARICOM countries either being penalized or on the verge of being penalized for banking operations which are deemed to be unacceptable, but which largely we are not engaged in some instances. And the second side of that story is that the very thing that they are accusing us of in CARICOM, and which is deemed to be unacceptable in our banking system, if it is so, like offshore banking, we do know and we do see that those are significant businesses in the economy of the developed countries. So basically what they're saying to us is that that kind of business is reserved for us. But if you get involved in it, you will be allowed to exit yourself because you will be accused of money laundering or terrorist financing and therefore would not be allowed in. But the way it is done, it is that the correspondent banks are threatened with huge fines up to millions and billions of dollars if they engage in any of the things that we are being accused of. So even though we're not aware of instances warranting that kind of harsh treatment, because of the risk involved that it might happen in our jurisdictions, and if it does happen, the banks that are engaged with us will be exposed to huge penalties. The banks are saying, you know what, your business is not big enough to attract my attention, and your risk is too large for me to risk doing business with you, and then you go and do something like that you're accused of, so therefore let me leave you alone now. And the banks then are beginning to withdraw from the region. And that is what we're trying to fight. As a result of that, we have gone, and if you go back to the news of 2019, you would have seen where I was one of the CARICOM leaders who was identified to go to Washington to talk to the American Congress committee that oversees, the Financial Services Committee, that oversees the banking sector and the financial sector, where these developments are integral to their agendas. We did that in 2019. The Prime Minister of Antigua went, as he was detailed to do. I went in September of 2019, and the matter was a CARICOM initiative at Washington. And during that trip, I met with some of the committee members and the chairperson and so on. Then came COVID, and everything else got mixed up in COVID, but the banking system had continued to face these threats, and as of now, they continue so to do. Then, of course, there were, we had new prime ministers coming in all the time in some countries, in Barbados and St. Lucia. We had elections around, and CARICOM came back to focus on this because it is of such a threat to the region, where the financial services are integral to the economic development and the national budgets of many of our countries. So recently, the Prime Minister of Barbados and the head of the Financial Services Committee of the United States Congress, Congress Lady Maxine Waters, agreed to meet as CARICOM and as the United States Financial Services Unit and sit down face to face to talk out this issue, because the issue is one that is of sufficient importance to us. And we were saying all along that one of the reasons why we are not getting the kind of response that we are expecting from the United States is that the people who are making the decisions are not listening to us. And they are making decisions based on information that is questionable in some instances or outright wrong in other instances. So we met, there was a CARICOM team of a number of CARICOM heads. It was the countries represented there were Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, Antigua, Belize. Belize is chairing CARICOM at this time, and so there was a very strong CARICOM presence at the level of heads of government and other supporters. We also had the international agencies that are directly involved and have an interest in the IMF. We had the Caribbean Development Bank, the Association of Caribbean Banks, and these we had Wells Fargo was there representing one of the large handlers of small transactions in the region. There was MoneyGram there, which again is one of those companies that deal with a lot of remittance transactions and so on. And we sat down face to face, and the Americans listened, and we outlined our case. A number of decisions were taken. I should tell you, one of the reasons that I saw a comment in somebody's publication here in Trinidad, as usual, that the government or the CARICOM is only meeting with democratic persons, and of course we are not meeting with Republicans. Just please ignore that. The government in the United States both in the Senate and in the House, Democrats, and in the White House. So if we are meeting with the officials of state in committees, it is quite likely that we meet with more Democrats than Republicans. But we do meet with people from both sides. And I could tell you that I am scheduled, we've been planning this for quite a few weeks now, I am scheduled to go to Washington on Sunday. I will be in Washington all of next week. And during that time, I have a program of activities to meet a number of the people who are directly involved in this, or who should know what we are concerned about and what the U.S. actions should be according to our relationship between CARICOM and the United States. On this trip, we had representatives from the people who came from the United States were Representative Joyce Beatty, who is on a major committee, and she is chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, which represents 59 members of the House. The chairman of the Financial Services Committee, who we had already been in contact with since 2019, Representative Maxine Waters, she is still chairing there, and she was co-chairing this meeting. We had a representative from Colorado, one from Louisiana, and one from Texas, and they came and virtually listened to what we had to say on this matter. And we have agreed, when we met in 2019, and Representative Waters heard of our situation, she immediately became very concerned and decided at that time that she would schedule some congressional hearings so that the issue of the American banks and CARICOM banks could come under examination under the congressional committees that will do that. And her committee was going to have some hearings. But immediately we got into COVID in 2020, January, and so that never came to pass. But on this occasion, we have a commitment that those hearings will take place as soon as possible. I can't give you a date. We discussed a date, but it's not confirmed yet. But what we do have is a commitment that there will be hearings in the very near future where the congressional committee, the full congressional committee, will meet to receive these, I would say, complaints or these difficulties that exist between our banking system and the U.S. banking system. There was also the question of determining exactly what the nature of the playing field is. Why are we being held to a different standard than others who are involved in the same business? And we need to take certain actions to ensure that we are all held to the same standard. That means we need to examine the legislation to determine that offenses have to be identified. But we in the Caribbean were more forcefully saying we don't want to be held accountable for things that we are not guilty of. If you are going to accuse us of money laundering, if you are going to accuse us of terrorist financing, then the legislation should require that there ought to be evidence to support those allegations. You can't just take action against us because you think that by the way we are or how we look, that we are in fact friends of terrorists, or that our banking systems are open to being abused by those who would harm us. There was one very interesting fact that we could have told the Americans, and that was that there was an Australian test that was done recently where they examined attempting to break into banking systems in 100 banks, or was it 100 countries? I think it was 100 countries. And the one bank that they did not get into was the one in the Caribbean, in Bahamas. But within 3 to 4 days, they were in every other bank that was financing people left, right, and center. And those banks are not queried or accused of being open-ended or loose. But again, I guess that is part of the plight of small countries attempting to do business of this nature. And what was determined is that what is required is a specific arrangement to ensure that the evaluators, I wouldn't say inspectors because it's not banking inspection as such, those who determine the fitness of our banking operation, that there ought to be training in short order, both for persons in the banks abroad and in the banks here, so that these officers will all be operating against the same yardstick of compliance. knowing what to look for and to determine if it exists here or there, depending on set standards. We also agreed that it would be useful for the CARICOM and the United States to meet regularly on this issue and probably beyond, so that we can, as we make progress, such progress can be monitored, encouraged, and where any difficulties arise, that those difficulties can be properly removed. Basically, this matter might not sound like a household matter to the average citizen in this country, but it is critically important that our banks are allowed to function without fetter and are allowed to grow, and we are allowed to benefit from the banking system. In most countries, one of the most profitable aspects of the economy of those countries is the banking business. If you go to London, the famous 1 square mile in the city of London, where there are 1,000 banks having their headquarters there, you look at the revenues that those banks bring to London, and you'll understand how important it is to have banking as a piece of your economy, a successful part of your economy. The same thing in any other city or any other country where you have operations, because the banking business is a business where virtually any trained person can be involved. And the next problem that you're going to face is development financing. If you do not have a strong banking system, then where are you to get your development financing from? Because if they're not going to support you in doing commercial retail transactions or trade transactions, do you really believe that they will continue supporting you in making the major funding that is required in infrastructure and development financing overall? So it is important that we defend our banking system. You will know here that our banking system has grown considerably, and would want to grow further, because it is good business to be involved in. Not just to cash your check that you get from your auntie abroad, not just to ensure that if you're sending some money for your child in Atlanta that you will get there, or if you want to import something you can pay for it, or your credit card can be dealt with. Not that at all. It is that this is business from which the earnings are important to the people of the country in which the banks operate. You would have seen Republic Bank spread out from Trinidad and Tobago into the Caribbean as far as Bermuda, as far as Ghana. This is business and growth for our economy. You would have seen FCB going out of here into Barbados, into Jamaica, and as the bank grows larger and stronger, it can do business further away and take on bigger portfolios. That is what others do, and that's what we should be able to do. And that's what we're fighting for. So this was the beginning of a major contact. The most important part of what took place yesterday is that we were able to get the people who have the influence to listen to what we had to say and to listen to what we were advancing as reasonable situations where we as a Caribbean grouping under CARICOM label, we expect to be treated better because there are benefits for us and benefits for all, and we require fair treatment. And you would see us staying on call with this. And Public Bank was there. They made a presentation yesterday. The MoneyGram made a presentation. Wells Fargo made a presentation. The IMF made a presentation. So everybody was on board in saying that we need to rectify this situation. And we in CARICOM are saying that CARICOM has a very strong case. And as we are concluding these lists, the grey lists and black lists and whatever, and some of the banks are not even waiting for any list to be determined. They're taking that decision at the level of their boardrooms that there is too much risk involved, and therefore we're not going to do business with you. We have to try and remove that threat so that the banks can comfortably face either the risk or the cost that's involved in doing business with our banks. So that was one, it was that issue which continued from 2019 over to where we are now, that continued into the meeting in Barbados. But because we were going to meet in Barbados, and a number of heads were going to be there. Other issues were dealt with pertinently because what was facing us was in June, end of June, the Summit of the Americas is scheduled to be held in Los Angeles in California. Trinidad and Tobago, you would know of the Summit of the Americas. We hosted that here in 2008, I think it was, when President Obama came here. It was for the Summit of the Americas. Well, this year, it's coming along again to be held, and it's being held in the United States. It is organized administratively, I should say, with a serious input from the OAS, but the host country is the United States. And that immediately spawned a couple of problems, which I will not go into much detail at this stage, except to indicate that there are some difficulties. And one of the difficulties was who will be seated and what will be the reaction of those of us who had a different point of view to the issues that have been engaging us for quite some time. You may recall that there was a time when CARICOM again had to rush to the United Nations, a CARICOM team, and I was part of that delegation as well, to indicate that we do not support forceful removal of the government of Venezuela and the replacement of the elected government by a president appointed by Washington. You may have heard and would have known about the President Guaido situation. I could tell you that today, President Guaido is not a member of the Venezuelan parliament, as far as I'm aware. I don't think he took part in the last election. There was an election in Venezuela. The opposition accepted that they lost. There's a government in Venezuela, and there are U.S. sanctions in place on Venezuela. So these complications are in place. But now, we come to a situation where there's a Summit of the Americas, and I'm not telling you any tales out of school here, and is that it is quite possible that in the Summit of the Americas, because it is being hosted in Los Angeles, that Cuba may be denied access to the summit. That would raise a difficulty for CARICOM, because our principles in dealing with Cuba are quite clear, that we do not have sanctions on Cuba, and we do not regard Cuba as the devil incarnate. And we had the last Summit of the Americas, Cuba was a member. I think when we had it, when we hosted it here, Cuba was there. So a decision has to be made. But ahead of that decision, you would have seen the notice that went out on Monday indicating that I was traveling abroad, that I was also going to meet with a special advisor recently appointed by President Biden to come to the region and to deal with this particular issue or these issues. Former Senator Chris Dodd was identified to meet with us, and we were scheduled to meet at Belize, but then it was determined that since we were going to be in Barbados, that the meeting, even though Belize is chairing CARICOM, that the meeting would be held in Barbados so we can all take part. We did that. There were two levels of meetings. I, representing Trinidad and Tobago, I met one-on-one, had a bilateral with Senator Dodd on Tuesday morning, and these matters were discussed. And on the following day, Senator Dodd met with the CARICOM team last night. We concluded that meeting. And we had full and frank discussions, and this issue is there to be dealt with. One, who will be seated at the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, and two, who will represent Venezuela, because we have a situation here now, not of our doing. Maybe if our advice was taken, we wouldn't be in this situation, but we have a call for and a demand that President Guaido be invited, or his representative be invited to the meeting, and that creates a difficulty for CARICOM because we don't acknowledge that there is a President Guaido. And the United Nations acknowledge that the government of Venezuela is the Maduro government. So the Summit of the Americas seating officials who do not belong to the bona fide government is a difficulty. And I will tell you something too. We faced this before. We had the painful experience, and Trinidad and Tobago took it on the chin, where while CARICOM was in the chair, an official from the Guaido government, quote unquote, had the floor at the OAS and castigated Trinidad and Tobago, holding us responsible when Venezuelans drowned on their coastline before they got to Trinidad and Tobago. We were held responsible for that at the OAS, even as you were in the chair. So we are hoping that that doesn't happen again, and we are hoping that the discussions that we are having, and which will continue, because I am scheduled to meet with Senator Dodd again, and he's meeting with other CARICOM heads next week. I have an appointment with him. He's asked for a meeting again next week. And of course, he's remaining in the region and going further south in Latin America to try and create a workable arrangement so that by the time we get to Los Angeles, end of June, that these matters will be there. Oh, sorry. End of June is the CARICOM Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. June 8th is the meeting starts on the 6th for CEOs, but for heads of government it starts on the 8th. So I expect to be traveling to California to be there for the period 8 to 11, thereabouts. And these matters will, I expect that they'll be making the news in the days to come. So I just alert you that these are issues which are quite weighty given the nature of the diplomacy and the issues that we have been living with for quite some time. The one thing about it is that your country, Trinidad and Tobago, has stood on certain principles. And we are adamant that if you stand on principles, then these issues, when they arise from aberrations, you will be in a good place. And we are confident that we are in a good place on these matters, but we are in fact integrally involved in the discussions, hoping for a proper, a cordial outcome. Those were the issues that took us through Tuesday into Wednesday, and I think I should stop here and allow you to, if you would require any additions, which I can deem to be useful in sharing, because not everything can be shared publicly in these situations, as you would understand, because a lot of behind-the-scenes discussions are taking place. There's one other thing I want to mention, and that is our bilateral arrangement, where you would have seen Minister Young. He just made 2 trips to Washington, and I'm about to make 1. And that has to do with our economics and trade and our energy business with Trinidad and Tobago. And there are significant initiatives in place where we are part of those initiatives, part of those discussions. I can't tell you what the outcome will be, and I can't tell you at this stage what we hope it will be, but we keep our counsel and we are present at the table advancing the interests of Trinidad and Tobago throughout. So next week is a very important continuation of those discussions that Minister Young would have had twice during this month. And as fate would have it, everybody's on the move. Tomorrow I meet with Proman, which is the company that is the biggest producer of methanol here in Trinidad and Tobago and the largest international marketer. They come to us tomorrow. And of course, you may recall that I did make 2 trips to Ghana one of which was a state visit. But after that, there was one where we were advancing the potential of our companies here doing business with Ghana in their new oil and gas arrangement. I am pleased to tell you that some progress has been made, some significant progress, but you'll hear more in the coming days, because we have been pursuing this diligently and resolutely, and notwithstanding the thoughts of others, we were confident, and we remain confident that there are great possibilities there. And we are feeling quite moved that some significant progress is underway there. So all these things are happening at the same time, and you will be seeing a very strong diplomatic activities from Trinidad and Tobago going forward into the next 12 months or so. So if there are any questions, I will try to see if I can assist you at this stage.
Prime Minister, just wondering if you're in a position to say at this time, depending on the result of the conversations with regard to the seating at the Summit of the Americas, if, for example, the United States is insistent that representatives of Mr. Guaido instead of Mr. Maduro are seated, could that see Trinidad and Tobago and other CARICOM states not attending the summit?
I couldn't say yes to that, because we have attended OAS meetings where there was a representative of a Guaido government that doesn't really represent the United Nations arrangements. Our position has always been that it is who is recognized by the UN that we will recognize as the government at the end of the phone line. And that made it very easy for us to continue to support our actions in dealing with our neighboring government of Venezuela, even though, or even as, the government of Venezuela comes under scrutiny by some and even come under attack by some. It does not mean that we change the status of who is the government there. So that question is answered, because we have already been seating with whoever they put. I just told you that one of their representatives had the floor to castigate us. Didn't change our position, didn't change our principles, and history will absolve us on that.
And in terms of the issues with the banking sector, for those who may not appreciate, I know you're trying to explain at the level of the average person how serious the situation is. Could you give a little more of a sense of how directly impacted the average person could be with this banking issue?
Well, fortunate for us at this time, none of our banks have been seriously affected. But if we allow the flow to continue as it is going, it most certainly will put us in a position where others are at the moment. So we are trying to head that off. At the moment, it is a very serious threat, and the outcome could be far-reaching. So I've only heard of this one instance where either some arrangements are being changed, but the local banks are very nervous, and that is why they are there with the CARICOM saying something has to be done about this, because if it happens to us, the consequences will be grave. And as I said, at the level of the small man, it is that you won't be able to cash a check outside and you can't do a transaction. At the level of trade, you can have trade, but you can't do the transaction because you can't pay bills or you can't get money coming into you, because the handling of money by itself is an infrastructure. And that is the word that has been used in this meeting in Barbados yesterday, that we want the banking system to be viewed as economic infrastructure and not a plaything to be kicked and tossed by people on whims and fancy. It is our economic infrastructure, and we have to take care of it in that way.
I don't know if you're willing to take questions on any other matters, or you would prefer to have that. Okay. We had of course, the increase in fuel prices are now in effect. Have you had any sort of review or assessment so far? And would the government be revisiting its CNG policy, as persons may be looking at alternatives while they're still waiting on the prices of electric vehicles to go down somewhat?
Well, first let me just touch on CNG. There was a time when CNG was the panacea pill, and we made significant investment. That was the technology that was available, and it was said in this country that if we put our vehicles onto CNG, we would escape the liquid fuel price movements and so on. And we did some of that. Two things happened. One, our local drivers, because of the availability of very cheap liquid fuel, local drivers did not see CNG as a money-saving initiative. And we do have some vehicles on CNG. We have some infrastructure for fueling them, and we'll continue so to do. However, in the meantime, the technology has changed dramatically. What it has done is that even among the liquid fuels, there were times when we had to adjust ourselves. One of that huge expense that we tried and lost money at Petrotrin had to do with trying to prepare and produce a sulfur-free fuel to be able to sell it, because the market had put down a deadline by which you had to produce this fuel. And today, all diesel, right, has to be sulfur-free. I mean, all over the world, the standard has changed. Now we're into electric vehicles. Right? Those were toys at one stage. Now we are looking at the flow of vehicles that will come into the country going forward is likely to be more and more electric vehicles until eventually internal combustion engines will not be in the mix. So we, in the country, we have a plethora of options. In this country, you have CNG, which carries its own support on it. You have liquid fuels, which are subsidized, and you have electric vehicles, which are identified for some element of help from the Minister of Finance. So there's no one-size-fitting-all, but the goal as we go forward is one of efficiency, technology, availability, and affordability.
Prime Minister, good day, Johnson of Emerald Newsday. Two-part question with regards to the banks. Are you aware of any international banks, or sorry, American banks that were planning on entering our market that changed their mind, and any that were already in existence in Trinidad that left because of all of these restrictions?
No, I don't know of any banks wanting to come in and make a turnaround because of what I discussed. But what I do know is that banks, some of those banks that we've had long correspondent bank relationships with, of decades, are now either have or on the verge of saying that the Caribbean is not a place that we want to continue doing business because of the climate, the risk climate that exists now. Either the risk of us being identified as banks that are involved in deleterious activities like money laundering and terrorist financing, and the risk of the fines that will come to them if they do business with us and we are found to have been involved in that kind of business. So to avoid that kind of risk. And the other side, there was a presentation yesterday made by one of the participants where it's not even that alone. It is the cost of complying. The banks are saying, yes, we can comply. The technology is there to comply. But the cost of that technology to be able to satisfactorily comply, that cost is too high, so therefore we don't want the business. That's what we're facing.
Can you identify these banks?
The what?
The banks that you...
No, I can't. I don't want to deal with... as a matter of fact, as it was discussed, it's not an individual bank arrangement. This is a climate, it's a banking climate arrangement. So it's not any one bank to say, well, we can pick on this bank or pick on that bank. It is the climate of banking. And the issue is what kind of banking business that you're engaged in. So in Trinidad and Tobago, when they say that Trinidad and Tobago is engaged in offshore banking, it's not Republic Bank or FCB, it's a country profile we're talking about.
Now, you're planning to meet in Washington come Sunday. Well, head to Washington on Sunday. Again, on this same banking issue. you just came back from Barbados on this issue. If after all these meetings, nothing favorable is said or done, what, if anything, can Trinidad and Tobago and CARICOM do?
Well, the banking issues are aside. I mean, on my trip to Washington, there are other things the main things I'm going there for is international trade business. So it is because I'm there on other business why we take the opportunity to continue meeting on this issue and hearing what else is to be said about it. But I wasn't going there for that, for the banking business. We did all that we could do for the moment. We took some decisions. There's going to be a release probably tomorrow or sometime on the decisions that were taken there. I just touched on a couple of them here a while ago, but there will be a clear release which you probably will get from the meeting. These tend to come out 24, 48 hours after. So I'm just giving you a heads up on that. And I don't want you to see these issues I raise as the issues of a bank in Trinidad or a bank in Barbados. What we're all facing from Bermuda all the way down to Suriname, we're all facing exclusion from the international banking business because standards have been set which they're saying that we cannot meet. And even as we meet them, they keep changing the goalposts. And they start taking action against us, even as we are querying that we are not being treated fairly.
My final question on what you said before, some other questions on unrelated matters. The trip on Sunday coming, any other Caribbean heads will be heading or just yourself?
This is bilateral. My trip on Sunday had been planned from Trinidad and Tobago for quite some time, and we have been working towards that. As you all know, we have an embassy in Washington. We have an ambassador there who has been working alongside our lobbyists. We do have a lobbyist group in Washington, and we do have issues which we need to lobby the Americans about because we have great interest in particular issues, mainly in the energy sector, and we have been working on that. So bilaterally, we have our business. I do know that the Prime Minister of Barbados indicated that she too would be going to Washington sometime next week on issues pertinent to Barbados business. So we all have to mind our business.
Yes, Prime Minister, there were over 15 murders between 22 is the number that I'm being told right now, between Thursday night and last night. Some are saying that the war on crime that the government, the state, has lost or is losing. What, if anything, do you have to say to that?
Statements of generalizations are not helpful in these situations because I don't know there's anybody running away from the fact that we are a violent society, and in recent years a number of persons have got their hands on firearms, handguns in particular, and in recent times, worse, some of our citizens have got their hands on heavier weapons, automatic assault weapons, and some of our people have been engaged in crime for profit. And it is something that has attracted the attention of the government, this government, the one before, and we have elements of state engaged in doing what is doable, in trying to identify the potential for these crimes to take place by seeking to disarm persons. But then a lot of the crime is also done and only known to us when it's done in the household. I know that there are calls for the government to do more, but there are certain limitations to what the government can do with respect to household crimes. But the gun crimes, which are largely the main stream of crime in this country, the government is engaged. The police service, the SSA, we gather information, we act upon it, and of course we are hoping that the justice system would be one where we can get trials and convictions quickly. Unfortunately, that is not happening. And we just have to keep doing more of what we believe will work, which is to find those who are so inclined, find those who are disposed to using firearms against their friends, their neighbors, their family, and bring them to justice. And by the same time, we appeal to the population to support the police, because the information that you have of persons known to you, where those persons are engaged in harboring crimes and criminals, hiding or holding firearms illegally, that your help to the police will go a long way in helping the arms of the state to head off some of these crimes.
Two more questions. The acting commissioner of police last night on CNC3 would have highlighted that there's an increase in murders as it relates to people not being able to talk out their differences. There's a lack of mediation. From the government standpoint, what, if anything, can be done to increase mediation from the smallest levels so that we won't see these increases?
We do have some structure where some help is available, but having it available does not mean that people will use it. We do have openings, and if there's need for more of that, then we will provide more. But what we're finding, and the appeals coming from the relevant persons who are involved in managing that, the appeal is to persons, if you are having difficulty, seek help, because help is available. The fact that it's available on the government's initiative, on the government's payroll, is no guarantee that persons who need it will use it. And that is particularly true with respect to inter-family stresses. You would have seen in the newspapers that members of the family were saying that they never knew that certain persons had problems of that nature, which could have driven them to have behaved in a particular way. In that situation, what do? People don't change color, they don't change height because they are thinking a particular way. You have to keep saying, if you are experiencing that kind of difficulty, guiding you to that kind of destination, reach out for help. There is some help available, some significant help is available. And if that unit, that department is overwhelmed by the demand for help, then we can expand that if needs be.
And my final question, I hope. You
have a number of final questions.
Oropouche East MP yesterday.
Who?
Oropouche East, Dr. Munilal, reiterated a call for cameras throughout the country. I think it was earlier on this month, the National Security Minister would have highlighted that there are discussions with the stakeholders to implement and fix the cameras that are not working. Can you give an update on that?
We don't need Oropouche East MP to make a call for cameras in this country. We have cameras which are in use, and they require ongoing maintenance and service and upgrade to higher and better technology. The Cabinet has already addressed those issues. With respect to the obtaining of a new suite of cameras, both in terms of number and quality, the Cabinet has cleared that. It is identified, funding is made available for it. We are going through a procurement process, and all that you would have heard there is that MP Munilal would have heard that is happening, and he seeks to attach himself to it.
Prime Minister, good afternoon. Charlene Rampersad from Guardian Media. You spoke about TNT having a violent society. In the past couple of days since school has opened, we've seen a number of fights involving secondary school children. What are your thoughts on this, and is there any special measures that the government can put in place to deal with these issues?
I am very concerned about it, and in fact, while I understand that it's a new environment, having been locked up home for almost 2 years, coming out, some children are releasing some negative energies, but the violence I'm seeing is unacceptable. The Minister of Education is actively engaged in reviewing the process by which we restrain students who exhibit violent behavior in the school space, and you will hear more about that in the very near future. But there ought to be consequences for violent behavior, as well as providing support for children so as to reduce the opportunities for them to act out those violent actions. So when you see these videos, They are known to us. There are issues to be dealt with there, one of which is that consequences flow from actions, and children need to be aware of that. And we also need to recruit the parents of these children to join in assessing their behavior and encouraging improvements in their conduct. Because all of these children, you see, every one of them, bar maybe a few, have parents at home who I would like to believe will not come down on the side of encouraging that kind of behavior. So that's one area which needs to be attended to.
Is the reintroduction of corporal punishment in schools on the table at this point in time?
That is not as far as we, there's no intention to beat our way out of this.
And the Prime Minister, sticking with schools, we recently saw a revelation from Teaching Service Commission that pedophiles were applying for teaching jobs, and in some cases, being given those jobs. What are your thoughts on that?
I have not seen that report. I've seen it in the newspapers, and I wasn't clear exactly what they're talking about, because I am not aware that part of the interview at the Service Commission is, are you a pedophile? And I am not sure that what the answer will be. And I don't know that we have a register yet of persons who can be so identified, and therefore you can identify them by virtue of the register saying that they are such. So that is something that I don't know, that I'm not at this stage familiar with what the Commission is saying about pedophiles applying for jobs. Because as far as I'm aware, pedophiles would be part of the wider society. And they can come in all forms and shapes and sizes.
And we know that a couple of weeks ago you were handed the report on the blackout. Can we get any kind of update on when the results of that, or that report will be released to the public?
It was passed to the Minister of Public Utilities, and I presume that he would have been digesting it by now. And sometime in the very near future, it ought to be out if the Minister so recommends. But I've seen it. It's all technical, straightforward, contrary to what some people might think. It's a report that deals with technicality. The people who did the report are experts in that matter. They gave their experience, and they made certain recommendations, and if only for the population to be aware of the recommendations that are being made and the cause, we should make that public soon. But the Minister, I asked the Minister, because the report came to me, I met with the team that OPM had appointed. We had a long discussion, and I received the report. And because of the recommendations that were made, I asked the Minister himself to, and the team agreed to talk to the Minister and to remain available for any further action that the government may want their assistance in. That is happening now, and I think that as soon as that is settled, the Minister will advise you and the report to be made available. This government has nothing to hide.
And you spoke about an upcoming trip to Washington on Sunday. We've heard talk that you'll be heading to Guyana soon as well. Can you confirm that and tell us what that's about?
Well, I have seen again today that I'm supposed to be making a state visit to Guyana. I don't know that yet. I've been in consultation with my, as I am normally, I'm in constant communication with CARICOM colleagues from issue to issue. Recently I was in communication with my colleague in Guyana, the president of Guyana. We talk about it. There's a major meeting in Guyana which I'm scheduled to attend, and this is a follow-on from a meeting that took place recently where Guyana is advancing and is being identified for some major agricultural initiatives in CARICOM, maybe finally. And that meeting I agreed to attend because I was invited to attend by the organizer in Guyana. So and as a result of that, I've spoken at length with President Ali, and he did indicate that when I come to Guyana, he would want to show me one or two things of interest, and I'm very keen to see them myself. So he and I would spend some time looking at some developments in Guyana. So I don't know that that is a state visit, but I am expecting to go to Guyana for that meeting, which is largely an agricultural initiative meeting.
Prime Minister, we are seeing that the economy is opening back up, schools are back out, the number of cases cases dropping in terms of the COVID. Any discussions to lifting the restrictions, more specifically the wearing of masks, making it from mandatory to optional?
I want to remind the country that even though we are in a situation where we have largely opened up our economy and removed most of the restrictions, we need to keep focusing on the fact that the COVID virus is still with us. And if we want to understand what that means, you look outside of Trinidad and Tobago and you will see some countries still battling with economic disruption from the COVID virus. We have been through a lot. It has cost us a lot, and we would hate to want to end up in a situation where we have economic disruption as the solution to the COVID situation in our country. Against that background, we are saying that the science, the medical advice is that we continue to wear the mask because it reduces, if not eliminates, our individual exposure, either from getting it for ourselves or spreading it to others. It's a little inconvenience, but that inconvenience is worth a whole lot if it prevents us from ending up in a situation of economic disturbance and disruption. So we expect to make some further adjustments. I will meet with the team sometime soon. There are very few things to adjust anyway. The one is the entry into the country of unvaccinated travel issues, the cruise ship business. I'm in constant communication with the Minister of Tourism on that. We will make a decision on that. I understand a note came to the Cabinet today. I wasn't in Cabinet this morning, but I hope that a note came to the Cabinet this morning. And I'm getting an indication from the Acting Prime Minister that the note did come. We're going to take some action on the cruise ship side, which is one of the areas which still exist there. We're going to take some action on the travel side in general. And the main action we took was the reduction in the intensity of testing. The PCR test is no longer a requirement. I just had my 19th or 20th test I had yesterday afternoon. And so the mask is the only one that I'm saying we are expecting to keep going as a COVID response in the weeks and months ahead, or at least weeks ahead, because it is simple and it is, right now it is only in a public place. At home, you're not requiring it, and where it is definitely common sense to try and reduce that, because we know that the virus is spread by aerosols to people who are close to you and with whom you are in contact for a long time. You will have seen what's going on in the United States. The government is just appealing a judge decision to maintain, where the government wants to maintain the mask, because on airplanes, the mandate is gone as of now. Those of us who are traveling, I mean, I could tell you, I don't feel comfortable traveling on a plane, cooped up in a plane with 300 people, where there's a very good chance that some of them might be carrying symptoms of COVID. And the one thing that you can do in that environment is to prevent your inhalation of it. So the N95 mask, which is said to give you a certain element of protection, it seems to me to be only common sense. In some places it's politics. But I have not forgotten what has happened in the hospitals of the world in the last year and a half. And for me, wearing a mask in places like that is a little price to pay. So in Trinidad and Tobago, you will see the mask being required in public spaces for a while longer. Our children are out to school, and you have no idea how happy and relieved I am that our children are out to school, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they would be supported, they would be helped, they would be encouraged. I mean, looking at these little children with a mask on their face, it just reminds me that we are in a pandemic, and a lot of people have died worldwide. The one thing we don't want is for children, one, to be deprived of education in school and socializing with their peers, and two, that they get infected with COVID and become hospital cases. There's nothing more distressing than seeing a small child in a situation gasping for breath. So let's just not follow others who would like to dismiss COVID as though it has come and gone. It has not come and gone. We are living with it. In the household, outside of the household. Let us not rush to pretend that it's gone. I would say let's do the opposite. Let's be extra careful, extra cautious, so that we'll give ourselves a good chance to not get the worst outcome.
Prime Minister, last two questions. One from me.
How many?
One from me, the other from my colleague.
How many last questions do you have?
One from me, one from my colleague. So the last two questions to you.
You have two last ones now. Okay. Okay, I'll take
one
them.
One from me and one from my colleague.
One from...
Some weeks ago, you mentioned that the cabinet took a decision to financially assist the Anglican Church. What's the tune of that financial assistance?
We haven't settled on that yet. As a matter of fact, you've taken me way back in cabinet. I know, let me not allow this to go down the wrong road. The government of Trinidad and Tobago continues to provide appropriate help to ecclesiastical bodies, whether it is the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Hindu parish. In this country, those bodies, which are integral part of our society, get help from time to time. What has happened with that Anglican Church is that the cathedral, and as you know, the cathedral is not simply a matter for the Anglican, state functions are held there, right? And the role of the cathedrals, we have two cathedrals in Port of Spain, the Catholic and Anglican. Those buildings and their management, from a management point of view of the country, those two buildings are almost as good as being described as state facilities because of how they're used. The earthquake damaged that cathedral, and the government's acquiescence to a request for assistance is just normal. How much is going to be? UDCOT has done some work to determine what the nature of the rectification is going to be and the cost of it. And then that will determine what the government contributes to the cost.
And Prime Minister, as we're on the subject of financial assistance, we've seen a number of protests by fishermen over the last couple of days. They are protesting the price increase in diesel. They've been calling for the government to offer them some sort of assistance. Are there any considerations for that?
They're protesting the price increase of diesel. Well, we've increased the price of diesel by 50 cents. On this matter of the price increase for fuel, I simply want to say that the conversation of those who believe that something wrong has happened, let the conversation go a little further. Understand that the increase that is being borne is not the total increase for obtaining those products. The government is bearing a significant portion of the cost, and what is being protested is a portion of the cost. I think the conversation should make that clear. It is not that there has been a price increase to obtain the products, and the government has said, okay, just pay it. The government has done otherwise. The government has said, taxpayers, because remember, the government doesn't have its own money. Government acts on behalf of taxpayers. The government has said, taxpayers in general will bear, in this instance, 50% of that increase, and the users will organize their business to bear the other 50%, bearing in mind that the product that you are consuming is now more expensive than it was before. That is the long and short of it. The product, because of fuel, hydrocarbon fuels, are priced against international benchmarks. It's an international product. To obtain it, to sell it, the price is established internationally. And the price of a unit of that product is now much more expensive. And that is why, if the government does not pay that portion of the subsidy, then the user would have had to pay all of it. And I think it's reasonable, given the nature and state of the country's ability to finance these matters. And I tell you, there was a time when people in this country paid the full price for fuel, you know, full price. It was a government initiative that says we'll provide some assistance through a subsidy. That subsidy program worked well, and it was affordable because an additional tax was placed on the oil companies, and that additional revenue was used to be the subsidy. But over time, the product just kept getting more expensive. There was $3 oil, you know. There was a time when a barrel of oil was $3. $3. That same barrel of oil today could be as high as $120. And of course, I have heard the logic of some of my friends saying that this problem has to do with us not refining oil. Please don't fall for that kind of gobbledygook. If being a refiner is what would have kept your price down, why is the price skyrocketing in America, which has so many refineries and so much volume of oil being produced in their country? And why are countries that have no refinery not seeing their politicians walking up and down the street arguing their future on gas prices? So I just ask the population to be reasonable. Yes, it's something we would rather not have to deal with, but the reality is that the product costs more, and the taxpayers are paying a half of the cost, and you, the user, are paying the other half. Reasonable.
Just one quick follow-up to that issue, Prime Minister. Is there a price of oil on the international market, if it goes below a certain level, that would cause, under the new pricing system at the pumps, for the government to look at a lower price at the pump?
Yes, we are formulating at this point in time that trigger point, where we did say early on that each month a posted price will be put there, and that posted price would be related to the prevailing market circumstance. We are going to get there very soon, and the Minister of Finance is already working on that. And the trigger point would be made known to the population, and we are hoping that we'll be in a position where the first of each month we can post a price in relation to what I've just said. And if the price goes down below that, the same way we have raised it in the context of the subsidy, it is reasonable for people to expect that if the price goes down, that significantly, that the price at the pump will go down. That is something that we will be doing for the first time in this country for a long time, which is standard prices. Of course, you would know the cynics will say, when the price is going up, it goes up very quickly. But it defies gravity when the price starts going down. But these are things that the marketplace will deal with. Thank you all very much.